Hey, this is Ben and Sam. We're back on, I don't know what kind of day it is. Apparently, still winter in Chicago. Anyway, we're super excited about today's guest and we appreciate him being here. So I'm going to jump right in. Look, though I should always comment on Sam's hair. Sam, your haircut's looking very spiffy. Don't want to overlook you.
I appreciate that.
Not at all. We'll circle you back in. Anyway, we're here with Daleele Allison. He is the CEO of Rooks DM. How are you, Daleele?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm good. So, sometimes I do homework, sometimes I don't. I'm going to own up to traveling this last week and doing very little homework. And so, with that in mind, we're thrilled you're here. And would you mind breaking down a bit, you know, what Rooks DM is, what you all are trying to do? And then, really, if you don't mind, I don't ever know if this is cheesy. I guess I find it entertaining. Sort of your path to becoming who you are, how you're CEO, what got you there. And then, of course, Sam will come in with the hard hitting science, I promise.
Perfect. That sounds good. Thank you so much for having me, Ben, Sam. I'm really excited to be here. As you mentioned, Daleele, Alison, Rooks DM. So we are a technology consulting firm. And so all of the work that we do is in around helping professional service organizations be able to work as efficiently as possible. And the how we do that is by implementing the right technology solutions to either automate or streamline their processes. So if you think of the headaches of copy and pasting data from one system to another, trying to hunt down documents through various systems, or having to open 3, 4, 5 different systems in a course of a day, what we do is say, hey, how can we eliminate a lot of those things that you have to do so you can deliver the value to your clients? Whether you're a lawyer, for example, can you spend as much time focusing on the matters versus having to do the admin work to service the client? Or if you're a financial advisor, as another example, spending more time on the financial planning side of things and the investment side, rather than kind of finding these documents, collecting them to get you to the planning side of things. So that's what we do. If we have about 2 hours, I can give you the background on how we got here.
Right.
My background is I went to school for technology, always have been in the tech field. Started my career, worked for a large financial services company in their IT shop. I was a systems analyst, did some project management, did some QA work. I've always been kind of that middleman in between the developers, the really smart people that build the software, and then
Hmm.
the business people, the people that say, hey, I'm really struggling with trying to figure this out, and I know technology can help me, but I don't know how to do that. That's always been my role, as kind of that middleman of helping facilitate those two pieces. And I started this company through a hobby, actually, of technology. So I have a co-founder, and back in 2014, what ended up happening is I took a stint away from technology to go work for a small startup construction company to run their production department. Nothing to do with tech. It was all around, hey, outputting the jobs that they had, and running their production in terms of the clientele, getting the projects done. And through that experience, they didn't have any, if not very limited, technology set up. And so what I did is call my buddy at the time, who's my co-founder now, and said, hey, I'm working for the startup. They don't really have really basic technology stuff that would allow them to be more efficient. Do you want to help me set that up? And he said, sure, you're my friend, I'll help you. Why not? And that was kind of the basis of how we started Rooks DM. We went through that process with that company. And then fast forward years later, I started to sell like just general technology consulting services. We did a bunch of different things in the early days. And now all of the work that we do is focused on automation and streamlining of processes for professional service organizations. So long-winded answer, but hopefully that answers both of your questions.
I was going to say, man, if that could have been 2 hours, and I'd say not long winded at all, quite streamlined and effective. And I want to touch on something, and I'm going to give Sam the question of what Rooks DM stands for, because I know he really wants to know. But I am actually going to touch on something that has not, that I recall, Sam can correct me, has come up in the first 80 plus shows, but it is a topic of great interest to me. And in fact, this is not a plug. I recently wrote about it for a thing, but you use the word hobby, right? And what
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to come back to, unless we jump in a little bit now, is I have another client, sort of a former client at this point, but to him, if you really want to insult someone's work or their business, you say they just treat that as a hobby. Like somehow it's not serious. And so it'll be interesting to hear a little more either now or as we go along. Like, was it a hobby or a side hustle? Like I think that stuff's really, really interesting because there is that whole universe of particularly entrepreneurs where they use hobby as a way of saying that's not a thing. And here you've got a
Mm.
whole business now. So I'll also be interested as we go along, if you don't mind, circling back to how it evolved from a hobby, if you really considered it a hobby, which is totally cool, and then how it becomes something else. Because I think how things become something else is an interesting sub theme of this show, right? Which is people are doing something and they're like, I could be bigger, it could be better, I could make
Mhm.
money, like whatever the thing is, and then it takes off. So maybe we'll parking lot that unless you got an immediate comment, and then I'll have Sam jump in because he loves doing that too.
I could jump in. Yeah. So it did,
Great.
I guess passion may be a different word to use for
Mhm.
it. But I say hobby because yeah, it did start off small. So I didn't just jump right into my business. So I was working on it nights and weekends before I kind of committed to it full time. And it started more out of the other word I would use is probably curiosity is, hey, I
All
was
right.
curious to see if other people would find this as valuable as the company that I worked for found it because I thought it was really interesting and it added a lot of value. So I just went out there and started to sell it. So that was like more of a hobby of like, hey, do you guys need help with your technology? And then in the early days, it was more, we did a lot of website work. We don't do that anymore now, but it was more, hey, people need websites. I wonder how many small businesses don't have websites. And that kind of started off as a hobby and then it grew into what it is today. But yeah, I would say
Really cool.
hobby, curiosity, passion, all of the above.
That's the trifecta. No, but I love that, right? Because again, entrepreneurs, nights, weekends, seeing if people are interested, being curious. And, I also teach, and I always say to my students, ultimately, if you can show you're curious, you'll automatically start
Mhm,
separating yourself from the pack, right? That employers, even when they don't know they're looking for that, I
mhm.
honestly believe that's one of the hooks that separates otherwise very competitive things. So that may be a whole other thing, but I'm just glad to hear you bring that up. Sam, what are the 50 things I haven't asked yet or all already overlooked?
Oh gosh, Ben, how much time do we have? Oh, no, uh, I love this concept of curiosity, and I kind of want to kind of unpack that a little bit, if you don't mind, Leo, because I'm genuinely curious about how everybody does, gets into what they do, and I'm also kind of curious about what your thoughts are on. I mean, certainly, the fact that there's so many IT firms that have just dumped their entire, a huge number of people into the marketplace. Um, I am curious about your thoughts about that because, quite honestly, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of small businesses that develop out of that, because
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are going to say, you know what, the hell with that. I'd rather, you know, toot my own horn and plow my own way. But I'm kind of wondering, back when you started this as a hobby or as a side hustle or what have you. I mean, being genuinely curious, when did the switch go from curious to passion for you,
Mhm.
and and deciding that this was really the direction that you wanted to go? Because at some point, I call it a little bit of a sickness, that entrepreneurial bug or what have you, because once it happens, and I'm famous for saying this, that, once that happens, you become unemployable, right?
Mhm.
It's not the same anymore going back to work for somebody else. And,
Mhm.
and passion and curiosity and all of that really drive everything from that. What was that moment for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, so I don't know if it was just one event. I think it was a series of events that happened over time. And in the early days, I think the hobby came from like I was the ones actually like building the website. So back in the day when I would go out and sell it, and then me and my co-founder would work together to do the building of things. So I was very hands-on in the early days, and I think that's where the hobby kind of kicked in because I remember during the weekend, it's like, hey, I got this website to build. I didn't even see it as like, hey, it's a website for a client. It's like, oh, I have this thing that I want to complete that's pretty cool, and it involves a piece of technology that I can use, and I'm learning how to use this piece of technology to make someone's life easier. So that's the hobby side of things, and I think for me, it took a little time before it became more of, hey, this is a business that I want to pursue, and so I did that for, like I said, I started the company officially in 2014, just through like that phone call with my friend. Fast forward to 2016, that's when I really got into the market and started to sell it to say, hey, who needs help with some of their technology items? And between 2016 and 2018, I would consider that like our experimental phase. We didn't have a ton of clients. I was still working full time. I was out hustling, if you will. You talked about like the side hustle, selling projects, going to networking events, building my network of people. And that was once again goes back to the curiosity of, hey, I'm just curious. Do people have a need for this, and what do they have a need for? And the other thing was the hobby of, hey, I enjoy building these things on technology platforms. So it started as that for 2 years. And then I think the thing that happened in 2018 was a culmination of things. I think one was the timing of, hey, I spent 2 years building up to this point and I had a lot of hands-on experience. I was building my network, and then we had several projects under our belt through our company. So I viewed that as a win. And then I think the second thing was, through all of that, we started to get much busier than we ever were. So it was like, hey, I can't sustain this nights and weekends. It just won't be sustainable. I'll hit a ceiling to where I'm stagnant, or I don't really know if this will reach its full potential without me taking the jump. I think that was one factor. I think the other factor, which people probably take into consideration as an entrepreneur, is personal life. At that time, I think in the beginning of 2017, I think it was 2017, 2018. It's been a while. It feels like I had paid off a lot, if not all, like all my debt was paid off. So I was like debt free. And then I was like saving, and I talk about this back then, I was like saving over 50% of my income just to save it because I had got out of the debt. So that was a whole thing that kind of put me in this position to be able to have a runway. And then I think the final thing was, at the company I was working for prior to quitting, that was a tough decision to make because I had really, really enjoyed my role and my job there. But they had, the company I worked for had gotten acquired. And so that opened up a good opportunity from a career standpoint for me to be able to grow. And I viewed it as a very good career opportunity. But it was like one of those things where like I had my toe dipped in 2 different places, and it's like I wasn't committed to one. And so I was like, hey, if I want to see if any of these are going to be full potential, like have its full potential, I need to go all in. So it was kind of like, it was like a decision point at that tree as well too, of like, hey, do I go all in with my full-time job and pursue that as a career, or hey, do I go all in with my business because we are getting busy and pursue that full time? And that was kind of like all of the factors that culminated. So I decided to, at that time in October, just jump ship and say, hey, we're busy enough. I've been doing this for a couple of years. I don't want to half-ass my employer, or excuse my language. I don't want to like kind of half it over there. And I'm really curious about if this business is going to take off or not. So I just decided to jump ship in 2018 is what ended up happening.
So just as a an FYI, you can have as bad a potty mouth as you want.
All right, fair.
But so I then just to go on the curious train, continue it on it. So when you made that decision, what was the to jump into it full bore and go 100%? Were there ever times where you second guessed yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Cause you quit. It's kind of a joke, and maybe it's real for a lot of people. You work twice as hard and get paid twice as less when you're an entrepreneur is what I say. So that obviously that was the first thing there, because it's not like I quit and had like a ton of clients ready to go all day, every day. I had enough clients, but we were still trying to build something. So that was always like, oh, am I doing the right thing? I think the other thing too is, as we've gone through multiple iterations of the business, so that's always a challenge, is you don't know what you don't know going into it. And like I said, it did start as a hobby. So when we started the business back in even 2014, and then even 2016 and 2018, all those milestones, we were in a different position. So we had learned a lot. And I think through that learning, it was difficult to say, hey, are we on the right track here? Are we making the right decisions? Is this where we want to end up? And having to constantly go through that, like we still do that today, of like reevaluating it, making sure we're on track. Is that the right path we want to head towards? And I think that's challenging because you don't really know as you're moving forward. And so you have some ideas, but you haven't been in this territory before. So you kind of go back and forth and second guess yourself. So that was a challenge as well too. And then obviously just the demanding of, and still a struggle to this day, is like just wearing all the hats. I think that's the most draining thing of being a business owner, is one day I can be in 8 different types of roles. I go from a call with the lawyer to talk about contracts, to reviewing invoices, to meeting with the delivery team, to try to figure out hiring, to try to figure out the strategy. And as we've grown, it's been less of that. But in the early days, I mean, you're doing any and everything. So that makes it even more challenging. And that's just exhausting, in my opinion, to the mind. And it still is. So like, even to this day, when I have a day where it's like so many different roles, I just feel winded by the end of it. Because it's a lot of context switching back and forth.
There's so much that you said there that I want to address, but I think one of the things that you said was interesting to me and resonated for me because I have been doing what I'm doing for years, right? And you talk about different iterations of the business, and I know from my own, personal experience, even in my current business, I've had to reformulate this organization 4 times in 13 years, and it has been, and I've had, great years, and I have had years that have just been like, I may have to just, it's, practically on life support. In fact, the DNR was already out, ready to be signed off on, kind of thing. And then you resurrect it and change the dynamic. So I'm kind of wondering, when you did that, what was the impetus for doing it? What kind of situation were you in? And what was it like to have to transition that way? Was it kind of an abrupt thing? Was it, I'm kind of curious because I know for me, the last time I had to do it was because of poor choice in vendor that almost took me down completely.
Okay.
So, I'm just kind of curious. Hopefully it wasn't anything that drastic for you, but
yeah, for us, it hasn't been that drastic for us. It's been kind of slow and steady for the most part. And I think the biggest thing is it did start off as a hobby. So we jumped into it in the same, I don't want to say the same mindset, but the type of work that we were doing when I first started full time is completely different. So that's where the iterations occurred. And I think when you are building a business, obviously it has to be something that you're passionate about, you like, and that you want to get up every day. And like, if I needed to be hands-on with like the delivery side of things day in and day out. And in the early days, we were doing a lot of services that were technology driven, but it was all around, like I mentioned, it was more digital marketing. So it was like website design and development, SEO, online ads, which all involved a piece of technology, but it wasn't kind of my passion, I want to say, or like how we look at how we deliver technology solutions for clients. And I think that was the biggest like switch, if you will, was the service offerings that we were providing. And that switch happened because we just realized, hey, yes, we can do this. We're probably not the greatest at it, but also we're not the greatest at it and we don't love it in terms of like delivering it to our clients. And I think that's what kind of caused a lot of that back and forth, because we were getting traction with clients in that realm to provide this service, but that service wasn't aligned with what we really wanted to provide, which is what we're doing today. But it did take a lot of time, to your point, is because you can't just flip the switch and say, hey, I'm going to stop. At least for us, we couldn't just say, hey, we're going to stop this today and do this tomorrow. It just takes time, and you have to almost like rebrand yourself in the marketplace, get in front of the right people, figure out who the right people are. So it's kind of that cycle of strategizing through it and then going to execute on it. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, it just took time, and it wasn't as drastic or forced, I don't think, because of any one situation.
So it's kind of interesting to me that because you described a planning phase before you actually did it, and I know a lot of people try to do that before they make an adjustment. How intentional were you guys in that planning phase? Because I mean, for I think a lot of people, sometimes that pivot has to happen fast. And I just caught myself, Ben. I made the cardinal mistake. So Daleele, we try to avoid using the word pivot, and I did it again. Just because it's the most overused word in all of business today. But I think less so these days, Ben, but still, it's the rule is a rule. But at any rate, to be able to make that kind of an adjustment. I mean, again, you don't want to do it without some sort of planning. But do you how ingrained is that in your organization when you do that? Because I think that is from what I have observed, that's the one thing that I think really a lot of small business owners could really benefit from, is the ability to be able to understand what the planning stages actually look like. Because oftentimes And I, this is, my own personal experience as well, because my dad and I always battled on, how it would, change something in his business. And of course, he never really planned it out that well. And he made a lot of assumptions that wound up not working out. And so we pull our hair, or I would pull my hair constantly about it. But, I've always found that, when you doing an appropriate amount of planning before you make that adjustment or that change really avoids a lot of the pitfalls that you would run into and assumptions that you have to go by. But and again, I think I'm getting a little off track here, but I'm just kind of curious because to me, that is so critical, especially when you're trying to make adjustments and guide your business through out of certain types of work that you're doing and more into some of your passion.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is critical. And I guess for our process, and it is still a struggle to a certain degree because you kind of have to do both. It's always like the analogy we say is like you're flying the plane as you're building it. So so for us, our process is continue to march forward with what we're doing. So that activity doesn't really stop. And it sounds kind of counteractive to the strategy piece. But in addition, you have to do the strategy piece. So you're kind of marching forward while doing the strategy piece at the same time. That's the only way that we've done it. If someone has a better way, I would love to know. And we still continue to do it that way. As we've evolved and grown, we kind of spend more time, even more so on the strategy and kind of slowing down of the marching forward versus before it used to be continue to march forward at the same pace you're marching forward and then try to squeeze in the strategy as you can and then make a decision based off that is how we've done it. And I think the big thing, and I mentioned it a few times, and it's become even more apparent as we've grown as the team. So like I have a co-founder, so that helps tremendously because I can go to him and that helps with the strategizing of things. It's just like brainstorming things. You can kind of think through things a lot quicker, especially when you're trying to like educate people on your thoughts or what you're thinking and stuff, then you learn new things. So it kind of accelerates the process to be able to figure out what the strategy is just by having a co-founder. That's my personal experience and how I work. I know I can make decisions a lot more when I kind of just brain dump everything and then we kind of ideate through it. So that's been tremendous. And even now within our organization, like we do quarterly planning meetings with our team and we go through that whole process to strategize things. But once again, we're still marching forward in the direction, but also spending time knowing, hey, if we want to end up where we want to end up, we need to be methodical and thoughtful and kind of plan according to that.
So you mentioned your co-founder a couple of times, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask this because I know I have had struggles with co-founders in my past as well, and it never seemed to work out for me. But then again, we came into each other's lives. We didn't really know each other that well before we kind of embarked on a business. But it sounds like you were friends with with your co-founder for quite some time. But again, friendships can change. I like my one of my best friends. I love him to death, but there's no way that I would ever like move in with him or something like that.
Yep.
I mean, you just know that. Oh no way, that will never work. But and when you're in business with somebody, it's a vastly different. I mean, some might argue more intimate than even a marriage because you are, you've got a struggle that you are working with together, and especially if you're working very closely. How did that either prior relationship change or adjust, or maybe it stayed the same? I know, I mean, I'm sure some people probably vacillate, should I bring on a partner or not?
Yeah.
What is it about, your co-founder that you feel, number one, why you picked him to join you in the first place? But I mean, certainly not everything is always, rosy. I mean, it could be, but
Yeah.
there's always going to be struggles. Can you describe a little bit about how that dynamic kind of worked from the time you guys first started?
Yeah. So he started, to your point, he started, I have some friends like that as well too, love him to death, but can never live with them. He started off as a friend, is how it all started. So I met him through my first job out of college. His skill sets are different than mine, in the sense of he's much more technical than I am. So he's a software developer by trade. And like I said, I'm more on the analyst side. So it started off as a friendship. To be more honest. And I've known him, it's coming up on 10 years now since we've known each other and met each other. We started off as friends, and then he was the friend that I called fast forward a year later to help me do some of that technology related stuff. I think the biggest thing for us is, first and foremost, values. Like, we're friends because we share the same values. Our interests might be similar, but also different at the same time. But I think the most important thing is like the values are the same. And we even realize that even more so now as we've grown, because there is a lot of things that are changing, but our values don't sway. So we love to help people. We're very curious. We have a passion for technology. Like, all things of those values are very aligned. And I think the other thing is we're very complementary to each other. And we always joke about this, about being in the same meeting, but not being in the same meeting, because our perception and how we hear things and process things there's overlap in some of it, but there's also like much differences on some of the other things. And I think that has been very monumental, because it's not a divide and conquer. I don't want to call it that, but we always say like we complement each other's skill set very well is what we do. And I think we kind of realize what each of us brings to the table and like what we're good at and what we like. And there's a very complementary aspect to it. And to be quite honest, I think some of it was luck. Like, I don't know, because I've heard other people have not had like good co-founder situations. I think a lot of it for us is luck and hard work, of kind of like figuring things out as you go. And then also being able to have like those tough conversations, but still do it in a respectful way and know that we're like all on the same team at the end of the day has been some of the biggest things that's worked for us.
So, I like the fact that you've kind of alluded to, the team, even though if it's just you and starting out, you and your co-founder,
Yeah.
we're the team. And then as you added, people on, it was, more of a team, but it's a very lonely place being, having being the founder or a co-founder in an organization. I mean, nobody else really understands the stresses that you're under and that kind of thing. And, it's, how do you, cope with that? I mean, especially now, I mean, as a solo business owner, I'm pretty much, by myself with my thoughts constantly. I mean, I don't have anybody to talk to. And, the last thing my wife wants to hear at the end of the day is that I had a bad day and why I had a bad day. And she works in corporate and she has absolutely zero idea of what, day in the life is of a small business owner. But, having somebody to kind of talk with,
Mm-hmm.
it, I would imagine that it is tremendously helpful, especially when you've got the kind of dynamic that you have where you share the same common values, common goals, but your skill sets are so vastly different.
Yep.
You complement each other, and certainly it's never perfect. So there's always got to be some kind of tweaking and working and things like that, where, and you mentioned it, there's being able to communicate respectfully to each other. Did that just come naturally, or do you guys kind of set the ground rules? Because I've heard both ways, where just kind of happens that that's just the way we are, or it's we set the ground rules of, okay, if we disagree on something, this is how we're going to manage it, or if we if something falls into more your wheelhouse, we're going to we're going to take your opinion more, strenuously or seriously than perhaps mine or something of that nature. Again, what was that kind of a formal arrangement with you guys, or did it just happen naturally?
Yeah, probably a combination of both, but I would probably say more naturally than not. Yeah, that's a good question. I would probably say more naturally than not. Definitely in the early days, everyone was like, it was all hands on deck. So both of us were really involved. As we've grown, it's been a little different. as we go through like the decision making process. But I think the biggest thing that we keep each in the back of our mind is who, if the decision is made, is going to be made with the best intention of the company. And I have no doubt that anyone in our team would do that. So I think that's the biggest thing and it goes back again to the value thing of like a trust of like, this person's not doing it out of a malicious intent or didn't give it a little bit of thought. We all make mistakes, so there's no issues with making a bad decision or a mistake, if you want to call it that. I call it a learning experience. But I think that's the biggest thing, is just trusting the other person at the other side of the company, if you will.
So you touched on something that Ben and I touched on quite a bit, and I would be remiss if I didn't jump into this because Ben likes to reference my commentary on this about mistakes, and I often say that I have what is it that I say about? I embrace failures. Like I'm happy to understand a failure because I don't really look at failures as I'm a monumental failure. And I think a lot of people hear the word fail, and it has such almost like it's complete. You're finished. You're done.
Yeah.
Once you failed, you are. There is no. There's no forgiveness. There is no coming back from it. It is as finite as anything. It is etched in stone. It is written on the side of the mountain there that you have failed.
Yep.
Right. And it's something that I think people don't really understand how to deal with it. And, you hear a lot about people saying, oh, I learn more from my failures than I do from my victories. And I think it sometimes falls on deaf ears. I mean, nobody likes to fail. You want to be able to succeed at the things that you do. But, you and it's been pointed out to me many, many times, and I'm probably the poster child for it. You could fail 100 times. You just need to succeed once.
Yep.
And because the odds are in your favor that no matter how many times you try something, as long as you don't try the same stupid thing over and over and over again to try and get a different result.
Yep.
And even that, 1 in 100 chances that you do the same thing over and over and over again, and you screw it up, and it never amounts to anything. But that one time you do it, and it works, then all of a sudden you're a genius, which to some. But the reality is that most people don't see all of the failures that came before that. So you said something that you look at them as learning opportunities. So I really kind of want to dig into that a little bit and see how you turn this this mistake, this error, into a learning opportunity, and then into a successful outcome.
Yeah, that's a good question. You're 100% right too about like the weight that people put on failures. That's exactly what you're saying, is like, hey, there's a lot of weight that people carry as they view the word failure, and it's like etched. I like how you said it, etched in the mountain, which is, it's not, right. We put that all in our minds, and I'm guilty of it as well too on occasion, but that's not the case as well. So your question was, how do I take the failure and kind of move forward with it? I think it's all around like dissecting what went wrong in the situation. So doing we do retros as well too. Just being reflective on, hey, this didn't work out. Why didn't it work out? What are all the components that went into this whole mistake or failure, if we want to call it that, and where in that process, or what steps along the way caused it to not work out. I think that's the big thing. It's kind of like dissecting to figure out where things went wrong in the process, and making sure not to allow it to happen again, or if it happens again, in a different way so it doesn't achieve the same outcome. So I think that's probably how we go about it. It's easier said than done. I know for me, it's a lot of like dissecting the situation over and over again, saying, hey, like, why did I do this? What was the reason behind it? Oh, I did it for this reason, and that's why I did this and that, the other. But it's kind of getting down to the root cause and why certain decisions were made to produce the result at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes I think it's hard to at least my experience has been, it's hard to share this with somebody that's not really intimately involved with what you're trying to accomplish or what you're trying to do. Because again, I don't mean to pick on my wife, but sometimes, you know, if I've had a massive failure, like the last one, and I have to go about reconstructing the business again in a similar way, you know, that you know, she's like, well, why are you doing the same thing again? And, you know, it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, there are different players involved. There's different dynamics involved. It
Yep.
could be very nuanced,
Yep.
right? So, you know, that it's that, you know, and I love the way that you kind of wrap us around that, was dissecting that. And you know, and that's such an important part of, you know, understanding why you made the mistake in the first place. And sometimes you just have to do the same thing over again because you just, there's no other choice. You
Yeah.
know, that's the only way to do it. And eventually it's going to wind up happening. I have been absolutely remiss, as I always am, because I know Ben always has the most thought-provoking and thoughtful questions, and I just kind of hammer away like a bludgeon at questions. So I know Ben's chomping at the bit to ask a couple of questions, and I know we have to wrap up here soon. So Ben, it's all yours.
Well, Sam, you're always very generous. As you know, I'm happy to listen to a good conversation. I have a comment and then a very basic question, Daleele. I'm going to set you up to bring us home. But, you know, the comment too, which, and again, Sam's right. I really credit him, is years ago now, but sort of exposing me to the larger idea of not getting so wrapped up in what failure is, right? I mean, you sort of broke it down, which I really appreciated. You know, one thing I was struck by listening to the two of you, and this is a comment, not a question, is just that, you know, if we treat it as so binary, it's either good or bad, right? We lose all the opportunity, you know, to grow and evolve. That's a little cheesy, but, you know, to keep moving forward. On the same note, not everything has to be successful. It's not, doesn't make it a failure, right? It's part of the process. So I just appreciated that exchange. I'm always happy when it comes up. You know, my second comment is it excites me to listen to any conversation that, you know, starts with curiosity and evolves towards reflection. I mean, that seems like it's the whole nut, right? If we can start the day being curious and finish it looking back, we've really done something effective and important. I'm going to ask you the biggest softball question of all, because I laid it out there. I didn't come back to it. I gave it to Sam. Sam didn't take it. So I'm going to take it, and then we'll use this as a way to wrap up. But first off, Rook's DM, what does that mean? I don't think we know yet. Do we, Sam? Did we ask that question?
We did not ask that
Did
question.
not. So, Daleele, if you don't mind humoring us, we're both dying to know what that means.
Yeah, so rooks, so my parents are from Ethiopia originally. The native language that they speak is Amharic, and so rooks is pronounced ruk, and it means to go far. And so our whole philosophy is to take people further than they are today, to take businesses further than they are today. So it's all around the concept of going further than where you are.
Right on. So that also means we have, at least I have pronounced it wrong every time so far in this episode.
You could say that, but no, that's the right pronunciation.
I'm always happy to point out my horribly inarticulate ways of reading.
Yeah.
So I think then, you know, to build off of that idea to go far, you're like, what's next? I mean, you touched on something too I didn't want to lose, but I think it ties into where I'd love you to finish up, which is, you know, you talked about we used to do websites, we stopped doing websites, right? Other people might be better at it or what have you. But I think one thing that's interesting for any sort of developing entrepreneurship, developing business is that, you know, maybe sometimes you fall into things or you take things on that you know you're good enough at, that pay. And then as other things come up, as you become more strategic, as you get lucky, I know I'm projecting here, you start thinking about the things you're not as good at, or maybe you don't even want to do, right? Like that's part of it too. You think, okay, if I don't have to do that, I enjoy it, but not enough. Because I think you used the word enjoyment earlier, one of those words.
Yep.
So I think my question is where do you think everything's going, or where would you like it to go? And you don't have to spill too much. And then as you answer that, maybe just make sure, because Sam is right, we all need to be aware of the time. Just what you want us to know, right? Like what the website is. I mean, of course, I'll link to all that when we post this, but just take a moment to just make sure we know where to find you.
Perfect. Yeah, so in terms of where things are going, I think we're perfectly positioned. So efficiency. So that's probably the biggest word you could think of when you think of Rook's DM, as well as, hey, we drive efficiency across the organization. And I think that's going to continue to evolve as, hey, how can I be as efficient within my business, whether I'm a solo practitioner versus a multi-million-dollar company? How can I get my operations to run as efficient as possible? And the how to do that would obviously be leveraging technology to allow your team to do as much as they can with the hours that they have throughout the week. So I don't think that'll change. It'll just probably change how people work to a certain degree. And that's what we're seeing now in terms of like the automations that we set up and even the process improvements that we do. So it's still always, in some of the steps involve human interaction, and some of the steps it's fully automated. So it depends on what the process entails and how the technology fits into that process to drive that efficiency within the organization. So I think we'll continue to see that evolve, and companies lean into, hey, I want to reduce my costs as it relates to driving to delivering my services, my solutions. And to do that, I need to be as efficient as possible. And that's where we kind of kick in. In terms of where to find me, LinkedIn is the best place usually. So Daleele Alison is my name. I think I'm the only Daleele on LinkedIn. So you can find me there, or you can check out our website, rooksdm.com, ROOKSD as in dog, M as in Mary.com. But yeah, hopefully I answered your question, Ben.
Yeah, you did. Totally. There was definitely, I always say this, it wasn't even a leading question. I didn't know where you were going to go. I just didn't want to lose it.
Yeah.
And I certainly want to make sure you hyped yourself. And I want to say now, without cutting off my host, we really appreciate you, man. This was great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it would be disingenuous to say I'm not always inspired anyway, 80 episodes on, but it's just really fun to listen to people. I mean, I've always thought listening to people talk about their work and how they get there will never not be fascinating to me. I said this the other day. There's some sort of like meme or trope, whatever the word is, that somehow asking people about work is boring or super American or super middle age or something. And I think, man, I don't want to ever stop that. I don't think I've ever been at an age where I wasn't interested in how people figured out work and
Yep.
how they figured out. And that's why Sam and I are a good match, because he likes to build stuff. And I really just like to ask people about how they build stuff. So, with that, we have been building, I'm going to do a very subtle tie in here. We have been building this podcast. We hope people will come find us. So we are happy to say the Blank Slate podcast is available everywhere. I'm going to take Sam's line. We really appreciate folks rating us, sharing the shows, hyping. That's always a thrill. We are not above or below that. Sam prefers 5-star ratings. And in fact, I think he will tell people, if you're going to give us less than 5 stars, you don't need to bother. That's totally valid. That seems like totally appropriate marketing from my perspective. But either way, I think we're going to say goodbye. And Daleele, it's been a great pleasure, man. Really. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much for having me and for giving myself and all the other people that you guys have had on the show a platform to be able to share our stories. So I greatly appreciate it. And this has been really fun today as well, too. So thank you for having me.
Oh, it's
Right
been
on,
great.
Sam. Oh, sorry, I'm cutting you off. I was gonna say good to see you too, sir. Sometimes I only see you online, even though we don't live that far apart anymore.
I know. But Daleele, thank you again. It's been great. You've really again shared some deep thoughts with us and with our audience, and I hope everybody has a chance to get to know you and reach out to you. And certainly, I've known you for a while and think very highly of you and your organization. So if anybody is looking for ways of being able to streamline and automate, think of Rook's DM for sure. And I think we are good. So thank you all for Daleele. Thanks for being here. Ben, as always, a pleasure. And I think we will go ahead and sign off.